Going through shots, and we've got Karen Hyder with us today, and we have our Emma Peel, the Queen of e-learning from the UK from way back when, not that long ago. We've got Leslie Price with us. So we're just going to queue up this shot. So I will start. Let's just start the show recording in 3, 2, and 1. Hey everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where talk, it's knowledge. And we got a lot of talking to do today. Joining me today is our co-host. She's subbing for Linda Joy today. And always a pleasure, Leslie Price from the UK. How are you doing, Leslie?
I'm very good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's nice to have you. Well, here we go. Let's start our show. So let's restart that. Because Fumble Fingers didn't do something. Okay, sorry about that. So live you're seeing the intro, and now we're going to actually replay it because my fingers went stupid. Actually, it's the brains that control the finger that didn't quite do it. Let's start the show recording again. I was really good on the 3, 2, 1. I was just, I got it. No mistakes. Huh? Am I lower third? Oh, we just didn't take it off. Okay.
Yeah, you're Karen Hyder, Rick.
I know. I do that on occasion. All right. So we're going to go back here. All right. So let's start the show recording. By the way, this is live broadcasting, so mistakes happen sometimes. So if you're wondering, what are they doing over there? We're messing up. Anyway, here we go. This is 3, 2, and 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where talk, it's knowledge. And I'm joined today by one of my favorite talkers, one of my favorite people, Leslie Price. She's in the UK, and she's joining us today, subbing for Linda, who is at a voiceover conference. How you doing, Leslie?
I'm very good, thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah. How late is it your time?
It's early. It's only 8:30.
8:30.
Long evening ahead.
Long evening ahead. That's it's true. That's not bad. Let's start the show. And we are back. Leslie, we have someone on the show today, Karen Hyder, who you've actually been friends for a long time on Facebook.
That's right. Some of my friends are personal friends on Facebook, so like friends and family. But then there's also other people that I've become friends with on Facebook because we share a passion for learning, particularly a passion for technology-enabled learning. And Karen is one of them. So yes, we chat on Facebook, but this is the first time that we've actually chatted in a live video environment.
That's good.
So I'm absolutely looking forward to it.
That's great. And Karen Hyder, she's an online event producer and has been involved in e-learning for a long time, over a couple of decades. And Karen, how are you today?
Great. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'm glad I could bring you two old friends together, semi-closer. Not quite closer, but semi-closer.
It's a start.
Well, it speaks to the fact that working and living in a virtual environment, we need Facebook as our social medium. We don't have a water cooler to stand over, and we don't have bagels to snack upon in the kitchenette at the office in the morning. So we have Facebook.
But we don't always talk about work. Sometimes it's fun as well, just like it would be in the office.
True. There's always kitten videos and political debates.
Yep. So what does an online producer do, event producer do?
Well, my role is really that of the behind-the-scenes technology person that helps a subject matter expert or trainer deliver content in a virtual classroom, kind of like what we're using right now in Skype, but many times we use tools like Adobe Connect or WebEx or GoToWebinar so that trainers and learners can bridge that distance gap. But for trainers or subject matter experts, the technology itself can be challenging to manage. So bringing in somebody like me to just make all the levers and switches work allows them a little bit more flexibility in communicating with their learners.
So what kind of tools do you use to do the online events?
My favorite tool is Adobe Connect, and I've been living and working in that for about 12 years now, since it used to be Macromedia Breeze.
Yep.
But I also spend a lot of time in WebEx and the GoTo products.
That's great. That's great. For about a year, I did a seminar series for Adobe on Connect on how to create an engaging classroom, how to make people, kind of get into it a little bit more and realize that there's more to life than just talking and nobody knows what you're saying. What are some of the challenges of having an online event that you found?
Well, I mean, the main thing is not being able to see people. So those of us who've worked in a physical classroom rely so much on physical body language feedback, and even subtle things like sighing and laughing and grunting and snorting. Those things actually are significant to a trainer. So when you can't hear those things, you feel like you're talking to an empty room. And why am I bothering to describe this in great detail when I have no response from my students? And it's lonely, and it's boring, and it's demotivating, actually.
And it's hard to really gauge what anybody's doing and how they're doing. One of the things we talked about a lot was voice, how your voice has to carry pretty much the whole thing. And then being interactive, being engaging, making sure that you're talking to people kind of like you're in the classroom, even though you can't see them. And for the most part, you really can't turn on everybody's video because bandwidth usually tends to start complaining if there's 50 or 200 or 100 people in a room. It's a little tough. What's the biggest class size that you've had to do?
Oh, I've certainly dealt with several thousand on large webinars, but my most challenging events are those where I've got 15 presenters doing 5 or 6 minute demonstrations, one right after the other, and I really have to keep the pace going. But most importantly, I have to have worked with each individual ahead of time to be sure that their microphone is functioning properly and positioned well, and their volume is good, and their mic isn't too close or too far away. I mean, really fundamental things become showstoppers if they're not taken care of. So people often refer to me as a guru or some sort of magic trickery person for webinars, and it's like the secret is preparation and practice. And also paranoia. If you're worried that your webinar will go horribly wrong, well, that's a good fear. You should be worried. And then step back and determine what are the things that are going to back me up if plan A fails. What if my network connection fails? What if my laptop computer fails? What if that headset I use every day decided to fail today? What would I do to proceed with the program? So it's not magic trickery, it's preparation.
What's the worst that's happened to you on those? I'll tell you one that I had, but what was the worst that's happened to you in Connect on one of those kind of big webinars?
There's so many. There's just so many. In fact, I'm doing a snafu session coming up at a conference next week. But if you read my blog, there's one about an e-learning guild demo fest webinar at the moment where several hundred people were logging in, and I was about to turn on my microphone and say good morning and welcome, and hey, we've got this huge lineup of zillions of people waiting for me to cue them. My computer blue screened. And I came back within a few seconds, but stupidly, I had downgraded myself to a participant. So when I came back in, I couldn't do anything. I was lost in a sea of participant names. And even though my colleagues were standing by to help me, they couldn't get to my name quickly enough and upgrade me to presenter. Thankfully, the first presenter just stepped in and did what I was going to do. He'd been there enough times to know what the task was.
Those are wonderful moments, aren't they? It's
Oh, come on now, Rick. It's your turn. It's your turn to tell us the baddie that happened to
Oh,
you.
what happened to me was this is doing it for Adobe. We're in the room, everything's working, and 5 minutes before we start, the room collapses. I mean, literally, it's gone.
The whole room?
And we went, uh-oh. And the person on the line who was moderating says, we're going to build a new room. And we're going, oh, great. So we had a lot of content. We built it. It took about 5 minutes of, I don't know how we got it built in 5 minutes, but somehow we got it done. We wound up just about on time. I tried to stay calm because I was going, wonder what the new room's going to look like. I wonder if it'll work. I wonder if I'll remember what I'm supposed to talk about. This is going to be fun. It was one of those, I didn't know what was going to happen. And so, yeah, Cameron, when you say what happened, it's not fun because at that moment you're thinking the people on the other end. You're not thinking about yourself as much as, oh, man, there's all these other people and they're not going to know what's going on. And they just spend time and effort to get here. Uh-oh. It's fun.
I think that's a really interesting point, Rick, and also that you've raised, Karen, that there are so many poor quality webinars and virtual classrooms out there that very often it does put an awful lot of people off what could be a really wonderful, enriching experience where you're able to engage with people that you wouldn't, like we are tonight. People on different sides of the ocean can chat and talk, but if it's not handled and managed properly, it does put people off.
It does.
You know, the physical classroom experience put a lot of people off too, but I think what was different is we didn't really have any choice. And once that door was closed, who knows how terrible the trainer might have been. But here we record things and we play them back and we can see how functional or dysfunctional something was. But, you know, I also think that we've lowered the benchmark for virtual classroom. I think people come to expect that it's going to be a poor man's substitute for real training. And so they come to it only half-heartedly and they plan to multitask through it. You know, it's a good time to clean out my inbox or update my posting in Facebook. Or crop these photos from my vacation. That's the perfect thing to do during a webinar. But what ends up happening, of course, is if you're only half listening, you're also not really learning. And so we as trainers and instructional designers have an obligation to make our content in a virtual session compelling enough to draw people's attention away from their inbox and say, hey, come and have this conversation with me. This is worth your time. You've already spent effort to log in at this particular date and time. Why not take that little bit more effort to actually participate? And for me, what that often means, and I would say this to anybody, if you want to change the dynamic of your webinar, of course, be prepared for anything that could happen, but also include lots more questions in your presentation. Questions that participants can respond to either by using a poll function where they're voting, even if it's just binary, like a yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of poll, or if it's a chat-based question where you can say, how would you apply what you're learning, or what is your experience with this? And what that does is it really bridges that communication and feedback gap that we don't like in the virtual classroom. And frankly, it's far more relevant than the feedback we used to get in the physical classroom. So I mentioned earlier the idea of like sniffing and snorting and coughing and sighing. We derive meaning from that when maybe there is no meaning. But if I say to you, how would you apply this, and the answer that you type is something that makes sense, then I can actually determine whether or not you're learning and whether or not you're getting what I'm saying in this presentation. You guys with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the very good webinars that I've been on, whether it be you are there to actually learn something as part of a class, so it's part of a course that you're on, or whether it's a webinar that is slightly more informal, so it's given by various organizations, one of the most valuable things I find is actually the chat that goes alongside it. And I was involved in one, a couple of weeks ago, and the suggestion actually came up within the discussion itself is, should you actually have two, and I'd be interested in your views in this, Karen, should you have two people involved, so one person is delivering the webinar, but you've also got like your wingman or wing woman, seeing as we've just passed International Women's Day, who is watching what is going on in the chat and is able then to bring out the key points, because very often after the event, some of the things that go on in the chat really, and people are very kind, people will put up resources and all kinds of things in the chat, and I think that is a very, very valuable part of webinars.
Well, I have all kinds of things to say. One is that I believe that having a partner is crucial to success. Partly because it's a really big job to handle on your own, no matter how skilled you are. And I've been doing this longer than anybody, and I still do better when I have a producer backing me up. Because if one wrong thing happens, then how clear of a message am I actually going to be delivering to my learners? I'm trying to troubleshoot something. I can't literally do two things at the same time. So having that backup is great. Having that person who can escalate questions to me and really filter through the things that are more like technical questions, or what was the link to that resource URL again, and will this recording be posted? Like, I don't need to be dealing with those things.
No.
I'd prefer to be dealing with the substantive questions that I have time to talk about that are relevant to the subject matter of the session. So if somebody can escalate those to me and filter those, that saves me a lot of reading and a lot of energy. But that chat, to me, is like the lifeline of a webinar. It's the back channel. It's the place where the shy go to be heard. It's the great equalizer. And I find that if we can use chat as a way to get people to really speak their minds, feel free to type questions, feel free to type resources, feel free to type answers to my questions, feel free to challenge me if you disagree with what I just said. I think it's the way that the participants have a voice, and it's what makes a live event relevant. If I'm not using chat, why am I bothering to do this live? Can't I just record it and let everybody listen to me pontificate on their own time, and then they can email me later if they have questions? Why are we doing this live if we're not having an open discussion? But I can't easily have an open discussion with 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 people, because having 2 or 3 microphones open at once is noisy, and just the variation in volume and quality and bandwidth are too difficult to get over in a webinar. So chat is, again, the great equalizer. It lets everybody communicate. So I'm a huge fan.
Now,
fantastic, Karen, because I absolutely, and now I know why we're friends on Facebook, because I absolutely, totally and utterly agree with you. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the voice and people not talking. I think it's also something that the person who's speaking, or even other people who are involved in the chat who are more experienced, can encourage others to get involved in the debate, but that again, not everybody has to, because it's okay also to be a lurker. There's nothing wrong with being a lurker, because we all have our own different styles and our way of behaving.
And our level of interest. You
Exactly.
may have seen in webinars that I've done publicly that I often ask a very plain question at the beginning. It's, are you willing to participate? And the answers are yes, of course, I'm willing to participate, or no, I'd really not want to participate, or we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to commit to anything because I don't know what you're going to make me do. So I allow people to just, how committed are you to this time that we are logged in together? And if nobody's really committed, then I have lower expectations. But if people tell me, yes, I agree to participate, I will play along with you, then I feel comfortable asking just hundreds of questions and getting them to discuss the points that I think are important. And when they fail to respond to my questions, I can just say, hey, remember earlier when I asked you if you're going to participate or not? Well, this is what I meant. Like, now is the time. So if you were a lurker, okay, that's fine. But some of you weren't lurkers. You said you were committed. So bring your head back in from your inbox and pay attention.
I think that's actually quite important, and I think the person who's delivering the webinar also has a responsibility to make those that are participating feel confident enough to participate, that they're not going to get shouted down. They're not going to get told, because one of the things, if you go back to when you were little in the classroom, oh my gosh, well, I put my hand up because I don't want to be stupid if I'm wrong. And I think that still applies even when we're adults and we're in a chat environment, whether it be on Twitter or Facebook chat or particularly in a webinar, that we still have that child inside of us that says, gosh, am I going to say the wrong thing?
And also there's another thing, and you mentioned earlier, Karen, that it's better having more people with you in terms of helping in a webinar. You said you have 1 or 2 people usually as helpers. And not only is that good for those critical moments when things go down, and especially if it's you're the one who's going down, but also, for example, I think it gives varied input depending on what you're doing. For example, on these shows, we usually have a co-host. I could do it by myself, but I don't want to bore everyone else. It's too much me. I'd rather have other people give input, which is why Leslie's here, because they add input that just makes it much more interesting. And the other thing is, for example, in my case, when I've run webinars, I have a hard time doing the webinar and paying attention to the chat.
Yeah.
So I usually have somebody helping with the chat, because also Connect doesn't have the biggest fonts on earth. I'm too far from the monitor to really read it well. So I'll just say, they'll call out the good chat conversations, and that way I don't have to worry about the chat part of it, because I agree with you. The chat is so important. In my case, I find it hard to do, partly because of the vision issue, going, too far. So I start squinting, looking at the monitor and not paying attention to it. So it's always nice to have that extra person helping out and doing things that just make the show flow better and give different inputs.
Yeah, I love that. I usually think of it as playing Roz to somebody else's Frasier.
Mm-hmm.
But, going back to just reading the chat and how difficult that can be, even if I turn my head this way, it's such an unappealing video view. So I don't want to be turning my head too far from my center point while I'm presenting, if I'm going to rely on the webcam. So there's really just the logistics of being able to read chat that can be challenging. But, I wanted to go back to something that we were talking about a little bit earlier with participation and people's level of participation. I want to point out that often when we're relying on our techniques from the physical classroom to work for us in the virtual classroom, they can really backfire. Like having everybody's microphone open. That can be noisy and chaotic, and people talk over each other, and there's dogs barking, and there's hold. There's all kinds of things that go wrong when we use that. So instead of saying that's our primary means of communication, we say, okay, chat is our primary means of communication. Keep your mic muted unless you're bursting and you just can't type so much. Then you can turn on your microphone and tell us all you have to say. But I also fear that when participants don't participate, we trainers use the old technique of calling on people so that they behave evenly and equally across the board. And I'm not a huge fan of that. In fact, as far as CompTIA's Certified Technical Trainer certification is concerned, that would cause a trainer to fail. Calling on somebody directly to force them to participate will get you a failing grade. But I read an article recently that I really liked the word that they used. They said, most adults find that behavior repugnant. Repugnant to call on somebody because you've determined that they should participate more than they are. So I think that's really important to remember, that it's not up to us to make people participate. It's up to us to create an invitation, create a learning environment that is free from the majority of the technical hassles that work, right? We have functioning tools to deliver a clear message that's not clouded by technical snafus left and right that you can't even focus because you're so busy worrying about the technology. Relevant interactions that make it useful for me to be live online as opposed to just playing the recording back later when I'm on the treadmill or riding the tube or something. Why can't I play the recording when it's convenient for me? But there's also that it needs to be compelling and relevant enough for me to want to engage with it and to make the information relevant for my own job and be able to answer questions about application and usage, and not just randomly throw out questions at the end. So I think there's a lot for trainers to consider when they're moving online. It's not just do what you did before, but redesign what you did and think about how to do it a new way.
Now, it's interesting you said that. I must have failed at so many sessions when I've given training. I tend to walk around the room. I tend to pick on people. I tend to be rather random on things. And I never thought of it as being repugnant. And I usually have the class laughing. But I could see where sometimes you do put people on the spot, kind of mainly to get their attention. And yes, adults, you shouldn't have to, though sometimes adults aren't any much better than children in classrooms. But it is interesting that so many people find that a non-good trait.
What interests me is what Karen's describing. Now, I'm saying what interests me is what you're describing, Karen, is a different set of skills between the skills that you need, although there's some crossover, but there's a different set of skills that you need to be able to effectively facilitate online compared to deliver effectively in the classroom. And I used to work for an organization called the Learning Performance Institute. And one of the things that our friend Colin Steed, Rick, you know our friend Colin?
Yep.
So our friend Colin Steed developed, was involved with them with developing a course on online learning facilitation. And the difference that you saw in people who'd actually gone through a course which was all delivered online, but where they learned the skills to be able to facilitate online. And then they also brought out another course which was about designing the learning that you also use when you're delivering online facilitation. So again, the way you present your slides, the way that you do things, was a different skill set than in front of a classroom death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear your views on whether it's something that comes naturally to people, Karen, or whether they should observe, or whether they should go on a course, for example.
All of the above. I doubt it's natural or instinctive really for anyone. It's possible that the millennials have a chip built in that has them managing online community and communication more effectively than the last of the baby boomers, which is where I place myself. But I think that seeing what best practices look like and recognizing that your instructional design model needs to shift. For instance, I typically add 50% more slides to a virtual version of a course than a physical version of the course. Because in the virtual version, I need that default visual aid to represent certain things like giving instructions or transitioning to the next portion or taking a break. In the physical environment, my face, my body is the default visual aid, and I've got a whiteboard that I can turn around and write on anytime. Online, I need like more stuff, more content, more instructions, more guidance, because it's not easy to just do that sort of on the fly. So becoming more structured is maybe unfamiliar for people. They like to wing it. Well, winging it online is really challenging, because what are you showing? What are you displaying while you're winging it? A blank screen or something that's not relevant for what you're talking about, like my face? Like, how does my face help you learn about training?
And what about
Maybe it
with
does.
regard
And I
to
was going to
what?
say, actually, Rick, earlier, I just wanted to finish up that thought about you were probably not a bad trainer in those cases where you called on people. I think rapport building goes a long way towards
Yeah.
allowing that kind
Hmm.
of friendly banter between people. But if you haven't built it in your virtual classroom, then you've got no right to pull it out and wield it as a weapon later.
No, and you're right. I was going to agree with you totally on the virtual classroom. I don't think I ever called anybody out ever in a virtual classroom. There is that sort of unwritten, we're not seeing each other. You're not really trying to put someone on the spot. You're trying to get people involved, letting them come to you rather than you go to them and say, hey, participant number 62, wake up. It's like that won't work as well. It's just,
Unless, of course, they've written something in chat where you have their name, in which case what you're then doing
right.
is you're referring to somebody by name and saying, hey, Lisa, da-da-da-da, or Joe, or Bert, or whoever has made, that's a really good point you've made. Everybody, this is what they've said, and I think that can act as a reward in some way for taking part or participating in the chat. I don't know how you feel about that, Karen.
The way you just acted it out is exactly right. You're validating. And isn't that why we're in a live instructor-led environment? We want validation that we're on the right track. And we want correction when we're on the wrong track. Another really good reason to use live training, so that when we make a mistake, the facilitator can say, Lisa or Joel, the answer that you gave there is just off enough that makes me think you don't get what we're talking about. So here, let me clarify, or here, let me re-describe it, or here, let me point you to a resource because your answer is just wonky enough to make me think you're not getting this.
Do you think people need training? Do you think that you need training before you do the kind of thing that you do, or can Joe Blogs just set themselves up and do it tomorrow?
Well, that's what I do, is train people. So of course I'm going to say you need training. But here's the difference. I have a client that came to me recently and they said this, Karen, we need to do these virtual classes and we're overwhelmed by the idea of it. And we really need to make a best impression right at the beginning. We can't afford to stumble out of the gate. We need to come out strong, and we cannot afford to make rookie mistakes. So I would say to you, what is your risk tolerance? Can you tolerate fumbling and giving everybody in your organization a bad taste in their mouth about what webinars are and do? Or do you come out of the gate looking like a rock star, where you say, this webinar stuff is amazing, and I didn't have to take the train, and I didn't have to stay in a hotel last night, and I can eat chips while I'm on my training, and that's pretty great, and I don't really see a downside. So which would you rather?
And one of the things that brings up is, and I tell this all the time to people, and they look at you like, why would I do that? And that's practice. If you don't practice and you don't really work at it, learn how to switch, learn how to do everything you need to do in that virtual classroom so that it's not new to you in the middle of a class. What do I do now? What do I press? Oh, how about that one? Oops, wrong one. I mean, we all make mistakes, but the thing is, they don't practice enough. And if you don't practice enough, you'll never get good at it.
Well, in the years that I've been coaching people to do online events, I always work with them 3 different times. The first time just to immerse them in the software and say, this is what we're using, and this is how we're using it, and this is why you can only have a PowerPoint, and no, you can't have a video file embedded in your PowerPoint, and no, you can't have a 120 meg video file to show me just the first minute of it, because the whole thing needs to cache before it plays, and we can't, the low bandwidth users will suffer. So I need to get them used to what the resources are going to be so that they can really think about how they're going to redesign what they would have delivered in a face-to-face environment. And then the next time we meet, it's more like, okay, well, here I normally would ask a yes-no question with just a hand raise or a head bobble. But now I really want to get them to show green check mark or red X to give me a real confirmation of this. So should I put a slide in there, or should I just remember to ask them? And my answer is, put a slide there so you don't have to worry about whether or not you'll remember. It'll be there. And then, okay, well, here's a point where I want to show a video clip, and it was embedded in the original file, but how do I play a video clip now that I'm here in the environment? And am I going to do that, or will you do that as my producer standing by behind the scenes? So you really need to have that whole conversation about logistics. Who's doing what? How does it work? How would the software perform? What do you need to click on? And then you really need a rehearsal of the whole thing start to finish. What are you going to say? When are you going to take questions? What are you going to do when you get to that point with the video? Are you going to mute your microphone or forget to mute your mic? So you need to at least click through the whole thing start to finish, if not rehearse every word. To me, that's 3 preps. That's 3 hours in preparation for a 1 hour delivery. And I've had pushback on that where people say, I don't have that kind of time. And my argument usually is, if you're not going to prep, why would you want to put yourself out there, put yourself at great risk to fumble something that you've worked so hard to have look good? I promise you that the time we spend together online will be valuable. And I promise you, if you don't spend that time with me, you'll wish you had. Promise.
Good point. That was good. Karen, how can people get a hold of you? Should they want your training or just to contract you or talk to you?
Well, if you could spell my name, Karen Hyder at KarenHyder.com, KarenHyder.com. And I speak a lot at conferences, online e-learning guild conferences. I just tried to speak at a conference in San Diego recently, but the fog kept me away.
Oh.
Thankfully, Adobe Connect allowed us to reach our learners anyway.
It's not that foggy usually down there, but sometimes it is.
Well, it was that day.
Oh, fun. Well, anyway, Karen, it's been a pleasure having you on. Hope you come on again because there's a lot more to talk about. We're only touching the surface.
Really interesting. Thank you very much, Karen.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Great to see you.
You've given me confidence and reaffirmed my belief that delivering online, particularly online live events, is a skill in itself. It's not something you just say, oh, I think I'll do that tomorrow. That'll be fine. See you guys.
Hey, let's put on a show.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks again to both of you for coming here. Leslie, as always, a pleasure. Our Miss Emma Peel. We love having her on. Anyway, so we will see you guys next week.
Virtually, Karen.
You too. Nice to be with you.
One of these days we'll all meet in person. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
At Leslie's house, or the pub up the road.
That's right.
Oh, there is.
Let's see. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you next week on eLearnChat. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.